Hello everybody, it is I, Brian the Pirate, and this is the second part of the weapon set swapping passive explanation videos that I'm doing. This one is focusing specifically on the Witch Hunter and the Ascendancy Passive, Weapon Master, where 100 passive skill points become weapon set skill points. If you just came from the other video, you're probably hearing that and thinking, whoa, that sounds really powerful. And it is. And you may be thinking, ooh, I can dual spec. No, I mean, you can technically to a degree. I did somewhat dual spec with this build. To explain this build very quickly, in one weapon set, I had a mace and a shield. I used Forge Hammer and I used Resonating Shield in connection to that weapon set. And in the second weapon set, I had a crossbow that would fire gas grenades with persistent ground so they didn't explode. And then I had corrosion in the gas grenades. So you would fire one volley of these gas grenades. They would cover the entire screen and last forever. The poison would deal damage and kill most things in maps. But if there were any rares or anything that survived or bosses, the corrosion would break their armor. I then had this node down here, the Molten One's Gift, which would make fully breaking their armor also work with fire damage. And then I would use the Forge Hammer or Forge Throw, whatever it's called, break that, and then walk around hitting Energy Shield, not Energy Shield, sorry, Resonating Shield, and my steps whilst using it, because of Ancestral Cry, would proc the fissures and just murderate the boss. It was a really fun build, basically immortal, because Resonating Shield is super strong. If you haven't tried it, you should try it, especially if you like doing the Trial of the Sekhmers, because blocking doesn't count as being hit in that regard anyway. But yeah, so that was the build. The gas grenades, obviously you needed to utilize poison, which is way over here. I was expecting to crit because in 0.3, they didn't include this in the patch notes, but thanks to some experimentation done by another creator called Dreamcore, we've ascertained that you can actually crit with gas grenades now. So I wanted all of that, a bit of crit over here as well, but then everything else was based on generating glory for Ancestral Cry and block damage and stuff like that to use with Resonating Shield. Now you may be thinking, yeah, that sounds great. I would love to make a dual spec build where I can have two entirely different weapons or two entirely different weapon types and really go ham with it and really min-max that. That's amazing, Brian. What's the problem? Well, it's actually a lot tougher to do than you think. And I want to express and tell you the things that I learned, because the passive skill tree actually comes with a lot of limitations, especially when in conjunction with weapon set swapping passives. Now, the two key ones, which I probably should have mentioned in the first video, apologies for not doing so, is that you can't allocate dual sockets, and you can't allocate keystone passives. If you don't know what a keystone passive is, it's these passives, the ones with the big border around them that are larger than regular passives. Like, these are notable passives, these are small notable passives, and these are just small passives. The keystones, they can only be allocated with the normal like passives, which is why you've got like this gold and white line. Likewise, for dual sockets, they can only be allocated with regular passive points. If you want to use weapon set points, you have to, like I did here, go around them. So I actually wanted this poison, but I would ideally like to just use one weapon point and continued my merry way to the crit nodes over here. But you can't. So I had to navigate around it, spending additional points, which is a little bit annoying or cumbersome. The only other route was, of course, via this dual socket, which you can't really bypass, or via these evasion nodes. I'm not using evasion, so these would have literally just been a waste of points. Thankfully, stun recovery and stun threshold is kind of nice, so it wasn't too big a deal having to go around this one, but it was points that I would have rather not have spent had the option been available. The other thing to be wary of is the passive tree itself has a lot of restrictions in its layout. And what I mean by that is everything is broken down into quadrants or sectors or segments. For example, defenses. You need to decide before anything else what defenses you want to have, because you are pretty much locked into where those defenses are. Because, of course, you're going to want those defenses with both weapon sets, which would mean that you'd probably just use regular passive nodes to allocate them. So in this case, you've got Energy Shield up at the top, you've got Evasion in this like lower third here, and then you got Armor in this lower third here. And of course there's the bit of crossover, Evasion, Energy Shield, and armor, evasion, and of course evasion and energy shield and armor over here. So you need to decide, okay, do I want to lean into armor, energy shield, evasion, a bit of the two? To give you an example, when I next want to utilize the Witch Doctor and make a proper build, this one was me experimenting with like several things at once, but my next actual proper attempt with the Weapon Master node, I'm thinking of doing poison and bleed. Now the thing with poison and bleed is the poison nodes generally are over here, and then the bleed nodes, of course, are generally over here, which means I'm kind of limited to this section of the tree, which likewise means that I'm kind of limited to the defenses that are here, which is basically I stick with evasion or maybe armor and evasion. It depends on what I'm in the mood for. So it's these little nuances that you need to take into consideration beforehand. So usually when I make a build, normally it's inspired by an item or a skill. Maybe a new skill has been introduced or a new support's been introduced or an item that has some kind of wacky interaction that has inspired me to make a build. In this case, it's kind of the reverse, so it's a little bit more difficult for me. It's the Weapon Master node that's inspired the build, and then I've kind of just decided to work from there. The reason I'm thinking of maybe doing poison and bleed is because that support that increases the damage or the magnitudes based on whether or not they're bleeding or poisoned for the opposite dot. So that's kind of what I was thinking. And that means that it chose what defense I have to utilize for me. The same could be said if you're doing something else, like maybe you're doing cold and fire. Well, the cold nodes, they tend to be on the northeast side of the tree, whereas the fire nodes, for the most part, they tend to be a little bit up here for spells, but otherwise down to the southeast end of the tree. So now you've got to go, well, does that mean that I want to be armor and energy shield so I can make sure I'm in reach of both the types of nodes? Obviously, it will depend somewhat on if you're doing casting. If you're doing casting, you probably focus on energy shield. If you're doing melee, on the other hand, or attacks, all your fire attack nodes are down here, and your cold attack nodes are generally across here. So then it's, again, a choice of going, oh, do I want to do armor and evasion? Because that's pretty much down the middle. Maybe lean into evasion if I want more preference to the cold nodes and so on. So little things like that you need to take into consideration. Or, like I said, if you're choosing or adamant on having a specific defense first, maybe you're locked in on energy shield, well, then that means that you have to go with the damage types that are available to you on this top end of the tree. All whilst, let me remind you, making sure that you've decided what dual sockets you want. Maybe you need multiple if you're using things like grand spectrums and such, and what keystones you want, because they, of course, limit specifically where your regular passives go. So if you are using fire, but you want to convert to chaos, so that means you're using black flame, you would either use black flame and have to navigate towards it, which will mean that a lot of your passives are going to be allocated around here, or you're going to have to think outside the box and think of a way where you can do the equivalent of black flame with items, which you can do. So there are sometimes ways around things. In this case, quite literally. So just to quickly summarize, remember that if you are interested in utilizing like the dual spec Weapon Master node, that before you do anything, you plan beforehand either what defense you want, because the defense you choose to go with is going to basically dictate where in the passive skill tree you are, or what damage you want to do with each weapon set passives, because that then will dictate what defenses you can use based on where they have you located in the passive skill tree. Also, that you can't use dual sockets with the weapon set passives, and you can't use keystones with the weapon set passives. One more thing to consider, especially if you're someone who likes to make builds using Path of Building, if you're not familiar, you've got the Show Node Power button as well. We tick this at the bottom of the screen, and then you can select what you want it to highlight. Most of the time, you're probably just going to leave it in offense and defense. And what this does, if you're not used to using this, is it highlights the nodes with red and blue, and the brighter it highlights, the more beneficial it is to allocate that node. At least in theory, on paper, should I say. Sometimes it's not always the case, and you will have to think about it. Likewise, if you've got a bright blue one, that's better defenses. So this is a quick example. It's actually highlighting very brightly Hulking Form over here. So if I was to somehow allocate Hulking Form, I would gain a additional 49.3% combined DPS, as you can see in the middle of that list of benefits there. Whereas if I was to select this node, I would only get a benefit of 6.2% or 6.6% combined DPS, which is obviously significantly less, so that's why it's significantly less bright. Likewise for defensive nodes, this one is pretty bright. I would gain an additional 3.2% effective hit pool, whereas if I was to select one that is slightly less blue or not blue at all, I've got a bright ring light in my face, so it's actually hard to distinguish what is blue. That one's slightly less blue. That would give me no effective hit pool, but it would give me a little bit of life regen. Now, when you're using this node, it is these highlights are based on 1, the skill that you're using, and 2, of course, the weapon set that you have selected. So make sure that when you're planning things out and you're using the show power node, that you're selecting the right weapon set and the right skills, because otherwise you might be going, ooh, this is highlighting all of these things in red with weapon set 1, unbeknownst to you. So you select them all, and that's where you allocate all your weapon set 2 points. And then it turns out, if you go to weapon set tool in POB and select the correct skill, all those nodes would be black because they don't actually benefit the weapon set 2 skills that you've allocated whatsoever. So just, again, something to be mindful of. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I just wanted to basically get that out there because I had a number of people who would go, oh, that sounds really, really strong. And then I would show them on stream these limitations, and then they'd be like, ooh, that actually sounds like a lot of work, actually. And it is. It is essentially having to come up with 2 entirely different builds, but then homogenizing them in such a way that they function as one build, and it's a lot more complex than it initially seems. So just make sure you take your time with it, you think things through, plan a little bit ahead, make a decision on what defenses you want or what damage types you want, and then you'll do great. I'm anticipating that some people are going to make some really disgusting builds with Weapon Master. Hopefully I'm going to be one of those people, but it's going to take quite a bit of time in comparison to just min-maxing the crap out of a regular single spec build. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, maybe you want to give it a like below. Maybe you didn't see part 1 of the series where I actually explain how you use weapon set passive nodes in the first place. In that case, that's in the video description. Subscribe and maybe check me out on Twitch as well. Twitch.tv/Brian the Pirate. But that's going to be it from me. Thank you as always for watching. Farewell. I'll remember you.